There's a universal feeling, a secret thrill every kid knows. It starts with the sound of your parents' car pulling out of the driveway. The engine fades down the street, and then silence. A different kind of silence. It's heavy and it's yours. For the first time, the house is entirely your domain. The rules are gone. The fridge, the TV, the forbidden corners of the living room, all yours. This is the childhood dream of home alone freedom. It's a rite of passage painted in the bright colors of independence and mischievous joy. We've all seen it in movies, that cartoonish fantasy of epic pillow forts and junk food banquets. A world where you're not just a kid, but the master of your own castle, if only for a few hours. But what if that castle has unseen doors? What if the silence isn't empty, but listening? The stories we tell ourselves about being home alone are fables of control. They are fantasies where we are the heroes of our own tiny, safe adventures. The reality, for some, is a different story entirely. It's a story where the familiar landscape of home, the creak of the floorboard you've heard 1,000 times, the pattern of shadows from the street lamp through your blinds, the low hum of the refrigerator, undergoes a terrifying shift. These sounds don't comfort. They report. Every thump becomes a footstep. Every rustle is a breath that isn't your own. The illusion of control shatters, and in its place blooms a primal, chilling understanding. You are not the hunter in this space. You are the prey. The walls that once meant safety become a maze, and the doors that lock might only lock the danger inside with you. The 4 accounts you are about to hear are not campfire tales. They are not urban legends passed down and exaggerated. They are first-hand, visceral memories etched into the minds of the people who lived them. These are the experiences of children and teenagers who stepped into what they believed was a brief window of freedom, only to find themselves in a waking nightmare. We will travel from a quiet suburban house where a broken promise unveiled a hidden intruder, to a trusting small-town home where a friendly face turned monstrous. We will witness a desperate drop-off that masked a terrifying crisis, and finally, to a sunny afternoon where a figure in a window proved that terror could wait patiently for hours in the dark. This is the shadow side of the home alone fantasy. This is what happens when the world proves that the scariest place isn't a haunted forest or a dark alley. It's the place you feel safest, once you realize you are utterly and completely alone. The promise felt at 12 years old like a key to a secret kingdom. My parents were going to a distant cousin's wedding, an overnight trip that meant a universe of possibility for me and my 18-year-old brother, Zach. The usual tension that filled the house before they left, the lists, the warnings, the last-minute checks, was different that night. It was charged with a silent, thrilling conspiracy. My parents stood in the foyer, a suitcase by the door. "Zach is in charge," my dad said, his hand on my brother's shoulder. "You listen to him. Bed by 10:30. No friends over." My mom kissed my forehead. "The number is on the fridge. The casserole is in the oven. Be good." I nodded, the picture of obedience. The moment the taillights of their sedan vanished around the corner, the air in the house seemed to change. It became lighter, crackling with potential. Zach turned to me, a grin spreading across his face. That's when the real plan was unveiled. "Look," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. "Mike and Jess are heading downtown. I'm just gonna meet them for a bit. Couple hours, max." My eyes must have gone wide, not with fear, but with sheer, unadulterated opportunity. He saw it and pressed his advantage. "You get the whole house to yourself. No one telling you what to watch. No one telling you to go to bed. Just don't answer the home phone if it rings. And obviously," he said, his grin fading into something more serious, "you cannot tell Mom and Dad, ever. This is our secret. If you tell, I get my car keys taken for a month. Total grounding." He was asking me for a pact, treating me like an equal. The weight of the secret felt adult, powerful. I agreed instantly. Why wouldn't I? He was my cool older brother, offering me a slice of his world, and in return, I inherited a silent, empty palace. I heard the roar of his Mustang a few minutes later, and then true silence descended. It was a Saturday night, and I was the master of my domain. The first thing I did was raid the kitchen, making a forbidden sandwich with ingredients that would have horrified my mother. I ate it standing over the sink, a rebel in my own right. This was freedom. It was intoxicating. The heavy, old grandfather clock in the living room ticked away, each tock echoing through the empty rooms, a metronome to my independence. I remember feeling a swell of pride. I was trusted. I was alone. I was, for the first time in my life, genuinely in control. The night was a blank canvas, and I was about to make my first, fateful brushstroke. My kingdom, I decided, would be the den. It was the coziest room with a huge, deep sofa and the big screen TV. The rule about no R-rated movies was another law I could now casually disregard. I scrolled through the on-demand menu, my heart beating with a new kind of excitement. I chose a horror movie I'd heard kids at school whisper about, one about a family moving into a house where the previous occupants had vanished. It seemed like the perfect Home Alone activity. For the first 40 minutes, it was a blast. The jump scares got me, but it was the fun kind of scared, the kind you laugh about immediately after. I was in on the joke. But slowly, imperceptibly at first, the joke started to wear thin. The movie relied less on monsters and more on atmosphere, on long, silent shots of empty hallways, on the subtle creak of a door moving on its own. And as the tension on screen built, my brain began performing a treacherous side quest. It started auditing the sounds of my own house. The movie's creepy score would dip to a whisper, and in that quiet, I'd hear it. A soft creak from the floorboards in the hallway. Just the house settling, I told myself. The wind outside picked up, moaning as it pressed against the large bay window, making the old glass rattle softly in its frame. A normal sound. Then the fridge in the kitchen kicked on with a loud clunk and a hum. A sound I'd heard 10,000 times but which now felt like an intrusion, a mechanical beast clearing its throat. The movie's protagonist tiptoed down a dark basement staircase. On screen, her foot hovered over a step. At that exact moment, a sharp snap came from the direction of our own kitchen. I flinched so hard I spilled soda on my shirt. My eyes darted from the TV to the archway that led to the dark hall. Nothing. Just shadows. My heart was no longer pounding with excitement. It was hammering with a low-grade, persistent alarm. I pulled the blanket up to my chin. The freedom I'd been reveling in began to feel hollow, vast, and full of unseen corners. Every time the movie cut to a silent, empty room, I found myself staring past the screen, my eyes straining to see into the gloom of my own hallway, towards the half-flight of stairs that led up to the main foyer. My imagination, fueled by the film, began populating those shadows. What if someone had been watching the house, seen my parents leave, seen Zach leave? What if they were just waiting for the lights to go out? The protagonist on screen hid in a closet, her hand over her mouth. I looked at the door to the den, half expecting to see the knob begin to turn. I couldn't take it anymore. The fun was gone, replaced by a cold, squirming fear in my gut. With a burst of frustrated courage, I grabbed the remote and stabbed the power button. The screen went black, plunging the room into near darkness, save for the dim green glow of a stereo light. In the sudden silence, the house wasn't just creaking. It was speaking. Every pop and groan was a sentence I couldn't understand. I didn't walk out of the den. I fled. I sprinted up the stairs to my bedroom, my feet slapping against the wood, that childish fear of something right behind me propelling me forward. I slammed my door shut, locked it with the flimsy button lock, and finally leaned against it, breathing heavily. Safe. I was in my room, my space. I tried to shake it off to reclaim the night. I booted up my Xbox, losing myself in the cathartic, predictable violence of Call of Duty Zombies. For a couple of hours, the gunfire and the game's loud soundtrack drowned out the fear. It was a welcome, noisy distraction, but all distractions must end. I finally shut the game off, the digital silence afterward feeling heavier than before. The house had gone truly quiet. It was late. I got ready for bed, moving quickly in the bathroom, avoiding looking at the dark mirror for too long. I climbed into bed, the familiar comfort of my sheets a small solace. I was just beginning to drift into an uneasy sleep when I felt it. A deep, subtle thud that traveled through the bones of the house. the front door closing. A wave of relief washed over me so powerfully it made me dizzy. Zach. He was home. The pact was complete, the secret still safe, and I was no longer alone. I listened, waiting for the familiar sounds. His heavy tread on the stairs, the creak of his bedroom door, the thump of his boots hitting the floor. But those sounds didn't come. Instead, I heard movement downstairs. Not the purposeful walking of someone coming home to go to bed, but a slower, more methodical movement. There were soft, shuffling steps, faint drag, a quiet thump, like a drawer being carefully closed. My relief curdled into confusion, then into a fresh, sharper fear. Why was he still down there? I lay perfectly still, my ears straining. The noises were all wrong. They were furtive, secretive. The stupid horror movie flooded back into my mind. It's just Zach. I argued with myself. Maybe he's getting a snack. Maybe he's cleaning up so Mom doesn't get mad. But a cold, logical voice cut through the panic. Zach didn't clean. Ever. My heart began a slow, hard drumbeat against my ribs. I had to check. Silently, I slipped out of bed and crept to my window, which overlooked the driveway. I peeled back the curtain just an inch. The driveway was empty. No Mustang. The street was a void of darkness. No car at all. The panic didn't set in. It detonated. It was a white-hot explosion in my chest that shot ice through my veins. It wasn't Zach. Someone else was in my house. The aloneness I had felt earlier was a paradise compared to this. This was isolation with a predator. My breath came in short, ragged hitches. I had no cell phone. The cordless home phones were downstairs, in the kitchen and by my parents' bed. The idea of opening my door and stepping into that dark hallway was utterly impossible. I was trapped. My eyes darted around my room, looking for a solution, a weapon, a better lock. The little button lock on my door was a joke. I knew from years of sibling warfare that it could be popped open from the outside with a fingernail or a coin. It was a decoration, not a defense. Then I remembered the closet. Not my main closet, but the small, crawl-in closet built into the wall near my bed. It was where we stored old blankets and suitcases. It was shallow, tight, and dark. A horrible, confined space. But in that moment, it was the only fortress I had. I moved like a ghost, pulling the door open just enough to squeeze inside. I pulled it shut behind me, plunged into utter blackness, and sat amidst the dusty-smelling linens. I drew my knees to my chest, making myself as small as possible. I tried to breathe through my nose, silent and shallow, and then I listened. For a few eternal seconds, there was nothing. Had they left? A desperate, foolish hope flickered. Then the footsteps came up the stairs. They were slow, measured. They reached the landing. They passed my parents' room. They stopped outside my door. I heard the faintest rattle as a hand tested the knob. Then a soft click as the useless lock disengaged. My bedroom door swung open. I could see a sliver of faint, gray hallway light slice under the closet door. Heavy footsteps entered my room. I could hear them moving, the floorboards groaning under a weight that was not my brother's. I heard the rustle of papers on my desk. A faint tap as something was picked up and set back down. They were searching my room, while I hid in a wall. I pressed my forehead against my knees, squeezing my eyes shut. Every muscle in my body was locked tight, vibrating with terror. I prayed to a God I didn't usually talk to. I bargained. Please just let them take whatever they want and leave. Please don't open this door. At one point, I heard a low, grinding sound, something being dragged slowly across the carpet. I have no idea what it was. My mind, unhelpfully, supplied images of a body bag, a weapon, a chest full of horrors. Time dissolved. A minute was an hour. I was a prisoner in a dark box, waiting for the door to fly open and for the nightmare to become final. I don't know how long I sat there. It felt like a lifetime, huddled in the dark, every sense screaming. The sounds in my room eventually ceased. I heard the footsteps recede, go back down the stairs. A long time later, I heard the distant, muffled sound of the front door opening and closing again. Still, I didn't move. I was paralyzed, convinced it was a trick. The first real sound that broke the spell was the roar of an engine, a familiar, aggressive purr that belonged to only one car. Zach's Mustang screeched into the driveway. Doors slammed. Heavy, frantic footsteps pounded up the stairs. "Lucas!" His voice was loud, angry, and laced with something else. Panic. "Lucas, where are you? What the hell happened?" I didn't answer. Couldn't. My voice was gone. He burst into my room. I heard him stop. "Lucas!" His voice was closer now, confused. With a trembling hand, I pushed the closet door open. The light from my room was blinding. I must have been a sight, pale, wide-eyed, covered in dust, curled in a ball among the winter blankets. Zach's angry confusion melted into pure, unadulterated shock. "What are you doing in there?" he demanded, but the force was gone from his voice. The story tumbled out of me in a disjointed, trembling rush. The sounds, the empty driveway, the person in my room. As I spoke, his face changed. The last remnants of irritation vanished, replaced by a dawning, sickening horror. He hadn't been here. He looked slowly around my room, and I saw him noticing what my terror had blinded me to. My desk drawer was slightly open. A trophy was knocked on its side. The place had been touched. "Stay here," he said, his voice low and serious. He grabbed the metal bat from behind his bedroom door and moved through the house, turning on every light. When he came back, he was ashen. "Call the police," he said. Together, we saw the full extent of it. The living room TV was gone, the entertainment center bare. The PlayStation, the small laptop my dad left on the kitchen counter, my mom's jewelry box from her dresser, all gone. Drawers were pulled out, their contents spilled. The back door was slightly ajar. The weak deadbolt jimmied open with what the police later said was a simple credit card. Zach made the call, his voice steady but his hands shaking. We sat together on the couch in the ravaged living room, under the brutal fluorescent kitchen light, waiting for the cops and for our parents to return from a world that no longer existed. The police came, took notes, asked me gentle questions about what I heard. They called it a brazen burglary. They said I did the right thing by hiding. Their words meant nothing. My parents got home just before dawn. My dad took one look at Zach's face and the missing electronics, and before a word was spoken, he stepped forward and smacked my brother square across the face. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet house. "You left him alone," he roared. The punishment was severe and lasting. Zach had to get a job to pay for every stolen item. The trust was incinerated. For me, there was no punishment, only the echoes. The fear didn't leave when the sun came up. It moved in. It changed the sound of every creak in the floor, the meaning of every shadow. The house was never just a house again. It was the place where the dark had gotten inside, and where a brother's promise had very nearly gotten me killed. My childhood, until that night, was a tapestry woven from safety and routine. In the years after my parents split, I lived with my grandparents in a small, quiet town where the houses had wide porches and the neighbors knew your name. My dad worked in the next town over, coming to get me every weekend in his old pickup truck. My uncle, my dad's younger brother, lived with us too, a constant, cheerful presence who taught me how to throw a football in the backyard. I was rarely, if ever, truly alone. The world felt like a solid, predictable place. The rules were simple and repeated like a mantra. Look both ways before crossing the street, don't talk to strangers, and never, ever answer the door if you don't know who's on the other side. Our neighbor, David, was woven into that tapestry of safety. He wasn't a stranger, he was a fixture. His house was 2 down from ours, a similar ranch style with a well-kept lawn. He was a friendly, quiet man in his 40s who seemed to exist in a pleasant harmony with my family. On Saturday afternoons, you could hear the roar of the hockey game from our living room, where David would be sitting with my grandpa, both of them yelling at the referees. In the summer, the smell of charcoal would drift from our backyard, and David would be there, a beer in hand, laughing with my uncle while burgers sizzled on the grill. He was the kind of neighbor who showed up with his toolbox when my grandpa's old truck wouldn't start, who helped haul a moose carcass into the shed after a hunting trip, his arms straining alongside my grandpa's. To my young eyes, he was part of the landscape of trustworthy adults. He was David, not Mr. Benson. He was safety. The night it happened was unremarkable. A weeknight. My grandma was at her weekly bingo game at the community hall. The phone rang, the heavy, corded landline on the kitchen wall. It was my grandma, saying she was ready to be picked up. My grandpa hung up, pulled on his jacket, and looked at me. I was sprawled on the living room floor, completely absorbed in the colorful chaos of my favorite cartoons. "I'm going to get your grandmother," he said. "You want to come?" I shook my head, my eyes not leaving the screen. The thought of leaving right as the best part was coming on was unthinkable. He hesitated for just a second. "All right," he said. His voice took on that serious, gentle tone reserved for important rules. "You lock this door behind me, and you do not open it for anyone. You hear me? Not for anyone. I'll be back in 20 minutes. I nodded, barely processing the words. "I know, Grandpa." He gave me a long look, then headed out. I heard the heavy wooden door close, the firm turn of the key in the lock from the outside, and the growl of his truck engine fading down the street. Silence bloomed in the house, but it was a comfortable silence. I had the whole place to myself. I turned up the volume on the TV, reveling in the minor rebellion. This was a tiny, delicious taste of independence. The cartoon characters ran and shouted, filling the room with harmless noise. For 10 perfect minutes, I was the king of my castle. And then the knock came. It wasn't a loud, frantic pounding. It was a normal, familiar rap on the front door's glass pane. The sound sliced through the cartoon soundtrack and froze me mid-crunch on a potato chip. My grandpa's rule echoed in my head, clear as a bell. "Do not open the door for anyone." I stayed on the floor, perfectly still, hoping whoever it was would just go away. The knock came again, a little firmer. I crept to the door, my socks silent on the linoleum. I didn't open it. I pressed my face close to the cool wood, right next to the glass, and called out, my voice higher than I intended. "Who is it?" "It's David, kiddo." The voice was instantly recognizable. It was our neighbor. The tension in my little shoulders melted away. This wasn't a stranger. This was David. He was exempt from the rule, wasn't he? The rule was for strangers. I knew his voice, his face, his laugh. My child brain performed a quick, faulty calculation. Grandpa said not to open the door for strangers. David is not a stranger. Therefore, it is okay to open the door. The logic felt airtight. "He's not home," I called back, my voice now relaxed, conversational. "Grandpa just left to get Grandma from bingo." I saw the truck leave. David's voice came through the door, calm and normal. "I just need to grab the wrench set I lent him last week. Promised I'd fix my sink tonight." My mental checklist continued. This made sense. He and my grandpa were always lending each other tools. "My uncle's not here either," I added, as if providing a full report. "I know," David said, and I could almost hear the friendly shrug in his voice. "I was just on the phone with him. He's over at the Miller place having a few drinks. He said it'd be fine. Can you let me in? It'll just take a second." And there it was. Every piece of information he offered checked out. He'd seen my grandpa leave. He knew where my uncle was. He had a plausible reason. He was a known entity. The last strand of hesitation snapped. I reached up, my small hand turning the deadbolt my grandfather had just locked from the outside. The click was loud in the quiet hallway. I pulled the heavy door open. The man who stood on the porch was David, but he was a version of David I had never seen before. The familiar, friendly neighbor was gone, replaced by a figure that seemed to blot out the porch light. He was swaying just slightly on his feet. His eyes were squinted, his face flushed a deep red. The smell hit me first. A sour, sweet, pungent odor of beer that wafted in with the cold night air. He was drunk. I'd seen my uncle drunk before, silly and loud, singing off-key songs. This was different. David's silence was heavy, his gaze fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. The friendly mask had slipped, and what was underneath was utterly unfamiliar. He took a step forward, crossing the threshold without being invited. He was inside. My house was no longer just mine. For a second, we just stood there in the entryway, the door still hanging open to the dark night. My childhood instinct to be polite wrestled with a new, primal unease. "The tools are in the kitchen," I said, my voice small. I took a step back, intending to lead the way, to get this over with so he would leave and I could go back to my cartoons and the safe, predictable silence. He didn't move toward the kitchen. Instead, he reached behind him with one hand and pushed the front door shut. The final thud of it closing felt like a period at the end of a sentence. The outside world was sealed away. Then he turned back to me, and his hands came down. Not violently, but with a deliberate, inescapable weight. They landed on my shoulders. They were large, work-roughened hands that had patted my head in greeting 100 times. Now they held me in place. I instinctively tried to shrug them off, to step back. "I gotta get back to my show," I mumbled, trying to twist away. His grip tightened. It wasn't bone-crushing, but it was firm, unyielding. It was a grip that said stop moving. My heart, which had been beating a normal rhythm, gave a hard, painful thump against my ribs. The cartoon laughter from the living room sounded distant and grotesquely cheerful. "Your show can wait," David said. His voice had changed. The familiar, easygoing tone was gone, sanded down into something low, slurred, and thick with an emotion I couldn't name. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was a dreadful seriousness that was infinitely worse. He leaned down, bringing his beer and tobacco-smelling face closer to mine. "You and me need to have a little talk." I didn't want to have a talk. I wanted him to let go. I wanted my grandpa to walk back through the door. A cold tremor started in my legs. "I'm not supposed to have people over," I whispered, trying to invoke the adult rules as a shield. He ignored me. His eyes, glassy and unfocused, scanned my face. "You're a good kid, right? You listened to your grandparents." He didn't wait for an answer. He started moving, his hands on my shoulders steering me like I was a shopping cart. He didn't walk us toward the living room or the den. He walked us toward the kitchen. The overhead fluorescent light was off, and the room was lit only by the dim glow over the stove and the pale moonlight through the window over the sink. Cast long, distorted shadows. He marched me past the kitchen table, past the fridge, and toward the counter. My eyes, wide with dawning terror, landed on the drawer to the left of the sink, the utility drawer, where my grandma kept the tin foil and the plastic wrap, and the knives. "No," I said, the word escaping as a breathless plea. I dug my heels into the linoleum, but I was a toy in his hands. He stopped us right in front of the drawer. With one hand still clamped on my shoulder, he used his other to yank it open. It rattled loudly in the silent house. Inside, nestled in a wooden block, were the kitchen knives. The big chef's knife my grandma used for roasts, the slender fillet knife for fish, the serrated bread knife, and the sturdy steak knives with their black handles. He stared at them for a long moment, as if considering his choices. Then his hand drifted past the big knives and closed around the handle of one of the steak knives. He pulled it out. The metal glinted dully in the weak light. Time seemed to slow, each frame etched into my memory with horrible clarity. He turned the knife in his hand, looking at it. Then he turned his gaze back to me. His expression was blank, almost curious. He released my shoulder and, before I could stumble away, he placed the flat, blunt side of the blade against my throat. The metal was shockingly cold. I gasped, my entire body going rigid. "You feel that?" he whispered, his breath hot on my ear. Couldn't nod. Couldn't breathe. I was a statue of pure fear. "That's a knife. You know what a knife does, don't you?" He didn't wait for an answer. He slowly, deliberately, dragged the flat side of the blade across the skin of my throat, from one side to the other. It was a mockery of a violent act, a demonstration. It cuts. It slices. Can cut your tongue right out if you scream. Can open your throat if you make a sound I don't like. Do you understand? A sound, a pathetic whimper, escaped my lips. Tears, hot and shameful, spilled over and streamed down my cheeks. I was crying silently, my chest hitching. I understood. I understood with every fiber of my 6-year-old being that the world was not what I thought it was. That safety was a lie. That the man who drank beer with my grandpa could, in the space of 5 minutes, become a monster from my darkest nightmare, standing in my kitchen with a knife at my throat. The betrayal was absolute. He had used my trust, my knowledge of him as a good guy, to get inside. He had waited, watched the house, known the routines. This was not a random act. He had seen his moment and he had taken it. And I, in my childish logic, had handed him the key. He saw my tears and his face hardened. "Stop that crying," he hissed, the fake calm evaporating. "Shut it right now, or I'll give you something to really cry about." He pressed the tip of the knife against my stomach, right through my thin t-shirt. I felt the sharp, pinpoint pressure. A new, more acute terror shot through me. This was it. This was how I was going to die, on my grandmother's kitchen floor, because I opened the door. And then, a miracle. A sound from outside. The distinct, gravel-crunching sound of a vehicle pulling into the driveway. Headlights swept across the kitchen window, painting the walls with moving bars of light. My grandparents' truck. They were home. 20 minutes had passed in a lifetime of horror. Relief, so powerful it was dizzying, flooded through me. My lungs pulled in a desperate breath to scream, to shout, to shatter this nightmare with my grandpa's name. David's hand flew from my stomach to my face. His palm, smelling of sweat and metal, clamped over my mouth and nose, smothering the scream before it could form. He yanked me back against his body, my back to his chest, the knife coming up to hover near my throat again. "Not a sound," he growled into my ear, his voice trembling now with a new tension. "You make one sound, and it'll be the last thing they hear." He turned us both, slowly, to face the doorway that led to the hall and the front door. We stood there in the dark kitchen, a grotesque tableau, waiting. I heard 2 car doors slam. I heard my grandma's laugh, cut short by the cold air. I heard their footsteps on the porch. The front door opened. Light from the porch spilled into the hall. My grandma stepped inside, still smiling, pulling off her gloves. "Brrr, it's getting cold out there," she called into the house, her voice warm and familiar. She turned to hang her coat on the rack, and her gaze traveled down the hall, into the dark kitchen. She saw us. Her smile didn't just fade. It disintegrated. Her eyes, which had been crinkled with laughter, went wide with incomprehension, then horror. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Frank!" she screamed, the sound tearing through the house. "Frank, get in here." What happened next was a blur of noise, motion, and pure, unleashed fury. My grandpa, who had been stamping his boots on the mat, burst into the hallway. He took in the scene in a single, devastating glance. His neighbor, drunk and wild-eyed, holding his sobbing grandson hostage with a kitchen knife. The transformation in my grandpa was immediate and terrifying. The kind, quiet man who whittled birds out of wood and let me steer the truck down the driveway vanished. In his place stood a force of nature. His face, usually creased with gentle smiles, contorted with a rage so profound it was silent for a split second. David! The name wasn't a greeting. It was a thunderclap, a roar that shook the walls. "What in God's name are you doing? Let him go!" David flinched at the sound, his grip on me tightening. He started backing up, dragging me with him, the knife still held out toward my grandpa as if it were a shield. "Stay back, Frank. Just stay back. I didn't mean, it's not what it looks like." His words were a slurred, panicked jumble. The confident predator was gone, replaced by a cornered animal. "It looks like you've got a knife to my grandson's throat," my grandpa bellowed, taking a step forward. He didn't have a weapon. He was just a man in a flannel shirt and work pants, but he advanced with the absolute authority of righteous wrath. "You put that down and let him go. Now." My grandma, sobbing, started to rush forward, but my grandpa threw out an arm to stop her. "Martha, stay there," he commanded. his eyes never leaving David. He took another step. The kitchen was small. There was nowhere for David to go but into the corner by the pantry. I was a limp doll between them, tears and slicking my face, my vision blurred. I could feel David's heart hammering against my back, could smell the sour panic on him. The knife wavered. My grandpa saw the hesitation. He didn't charge. He kept coming, slow and relentless. His hands held out to his sides but clenched into white-knuckled fists. "You come into my house," he said, his voice dropping to a low, venomous register that was more frightening than the shout. "You scare my boy. You touch him. You think there's a place on this earth you can hide from me after this." Something in his tone, the utter certainty of the threat, broke the last of David's resolve. With a strangled cry that was part sob, part snarl, he shoved me forward with all his strength. I stumbled, my legs giving way, and crashed to the hard linoleum floor at my grandpa's feet. The knife clattered beside me. The moment I was free, my grandma was there. She scooped me up in a movement faster than I thought possible, her arms wrapping around me like steel bands. She buried my face in her chest, turning me away from the men. "You're safe, baby, you're safe. I've got you. I've got you," she chanted into my hair, her own body shaking violently. But she held me so tight I could hardly breathe. And in that moment, that pressure was the only thing in the world that felt real. I couldn't see, but I could hear. I heard a grunt of effort, the sickening thud of a body hitting the cupboards, the crash of a chair overturning. I heard my grandpa, not shouting anymore, but growling low, guttural words I couldn't make out. There was the sound of a struggle, short and brutal. Then the scuffling moved away, through the kitchen, into the hall. I heard the front door wrench open. A final, meaty thump, and a cry of pain. Then the sound of the door slamming shut with a force that rattled the whole house. Silence descended, broken only by my grandma's ragged breathing and my own muffled sobs against her dress. She rocked me back and forth. "It's over, sweetheart. He's gone. He's gone." My grandpa came back into the kitchen. I peeked out from the sanctuary of my grandma's arms. He was standing in the doorway, breathing heavily, his shirt torn at the collar. His knuckles were raw and bleeding. He looked at my grandma, then at me, and the fury in his eyes softened into something else. A deep, trembling relief, and a sorrow that seemed to age him 10 years on the spot. He walked over, knelt down on the floor next to us, and put a huge, gentle hand on my head. His hand was shaking. "You're okay," he said, his voice rough. "You're okay, son. They didn't call the police." In our small town in that era, it was different. My grandpa was a respected man, a lifelong resident, a hunter and a provider. He had friends who were cops, sure, but this was a matter of family, a matter of justice. As my grandma cleaned my face and gave me a cup of warm milk with shaking hands, my grandpa moved through the house with a grim purpose. He checked every lock. He stood at the living room window for a long time, staring out into the dark toward David's house. The silence between my grandparents was heavy, charged with things unsaid. Later, after I was put to bed in their room, door locked, lights on, I heard them talking in low, urgent tones in the kitchen. I crept out of bed and pressed my ear to the door. I couldn't make out words, but I heard the tone. It was serious, final. I heard my grandpa say, "Take care of it, tonight." I heard the back door open and close. I heard his truck start up, not with its usual gentle rumble, but with a roar. I watched from the window as the headlights cut through the night and he pulled out of the driveway, not turning toward town, but heading the other way, toward the old logging roads that led into the deep woods. I never saw David again. Not at our door, not in his yard, not at the local store. It was as if he had vanished into the thin, cold air of that night. When I asked days later where he went, my grandparents exchanged a look. "He moved away," my grandpa said simply, his tone brooking no further questions. "Suddenly. Won't be bothering anyone again." The matter was closed. In our town, no one really questioned it. People moved. Things happened. My grandpa's word was his bond, and if he said David was gone, then David was gone. Life returned to its rhythm, but the tapestry was forever altered. The rule about not opening the door became an iron law, reinforced with a new gravity I now understood in my bones. The trust was gone. For years, the sound of a knock at the door would send a jolt of ice through my veins. I would peer through the peephole long after I was tall enough to reach it, my heart in my throat, verifying and re-verifying who was there. The full understanding of what happened that night, and what might have happened after, came to me slowly, in pieces as I grew older. In my teens, the childish fear matured into a cold, analytical horror. I replayed the events. David knowing the exact moment I was alone. His deliberate lies to get me to open the door. The knife. His clear, premeditated intent. He hadn't come for a wrench. He had come for me. The realization was a sickness that never fully left. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place years later, long after I'd moved away, at my grandpa's funeral. The house was full of people, his old friends from the hunt club, neighbors, former co-workers. Stories were told about his strength, his fairness, his quiet reliability. After everyone had left, I sat with my grandma in the quiet living room, the same room where I'd watched cartoons a lifetime ago. We were talking about him, about the man he was. Summoning my courage, I brought up that night. He was so brave, I said. The way he came in and handled it. He saved me. My grandma grew very still. She looked down at her hands, folded in her lap. It was the most terrified I've ever been, she said softly. Before or since? I nodded. I still can't believe you didn't call the police. She didn't answer for a long time. Your grandfather, he believed in handling family matters, in making sure a threat was truly gone. She looked up at me, her eyes old and tired. Do you remember? After he went out hunting that night? I did. I had a faint, dreamlike memory of the truck leaving late. He never hunted at night, I said slowly, unless he was going camping for a few days. He wasn't camping, she whispered. She looked toward the back window, as if she could still see his truck pulling out. He came back before dawn. He was quiet. He cleaned his truck out the next morning, down by the river. Used the hose on the bed for a long time. She met my eyes again, and in her gaze, I saw the unspoken truth we had danced around for 2 decades. He was a good hunter, your grandpa, the best around. No one would think twice about a bloody tarp in his truck. No one would question him driving out of town late, or coming back with an empty truck before sunrise. The silence that stretched between us was thick with the awful, comforting finality of it. My grandpa, the pillar of the community, the church-going man, the friend to local deputies, had not just thrown a predator out of his house. He had followed him into the dark. He had ensured, in the most permanent way he knew, that the man who threatened his family would never, ever have the chance to do it again. To me, to anyone, he had traded a piece of his soul to buy back my safety. That was the true cost of the open door. And in the haunted, grateful quiet of my grandmother's living room, I finally understood the full weight of the debt I could never repay. Spring break of my sophomore year was a monument to boredom. My parents were on a cruise, leaving me with a house full of quiet and a fridge full of microwave meals. It was the kind of freedom that sounds great in theory, no curfew, no rules, but by day 3 it had curdled into a low-grade restlessness. I was just hanging out in my room, scrolling through the same apps, listening to the empty house sigh and settle around me. That's when my phone lit up with a call. Not from my parents or my best friend, but from Mason. Mason was what you'd call a mutual friend. We had a few classes together, ran in overlapping social circles, but we never texted just to talk. Seeing his name flash on the screen was unusual enough to cut through the boredom. I answered, "Hey, what's up?" Before I could even finish the greeting, his voice came through, tense and strangely flat. "Hey, what are you doing right now?" I frowned at the wall. "Nothing, man. Just chilling at home. Parents are gone." I expected some casual small talk, maybe an invite to a party I hadn't heard about. What I got was a direct, jarring request. "Listen, I need to drop Neil off. He needs a place to stay tonight. Just for one night." The request landed like a lead weight. Neil. I'd known Neil since 3rd grade. He was the class clown, the guy with zero filter who'd say anything for a laugh. We'd been tight for years, but recently he'd started to drift. Not from me specifically, but from reality. My brother, a year ahead of us, had mentioned it first. You see Neil lately? Dude's acting super weird in chem. Started laughing for no reason. Clapping when the teacher was talking. It's kind of messed up. Other friends had stories, too. Neil ranting about the basketball coaches being in a secret society, about teachers planting thoughts in his head. We all chalked it up to Neil being Neil, eccentric, maybe smoking too much weed. It was a background rumor, not a front-of-mind concern. And now Mason wanted to deposit him at my empty house. A deep, instinctual reluctance washed over me. The solitude I'd been complaining about suddenly felt precious. A fragile peace I didn't want disrupted by unpredictable energy. I don't know, Mason, I said, my voice slow with hesitation. I'm not really in the mood for company. Just want to solo vibe this break. You know? There was a pause on the other end. Then Mason's voice came back, and the flat tension was gone, replaced by something raw and desperate. It was a plea. Come on, man. Please. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. He can't go home. I need to get him somewhere for the night. I'll owe you big time. I was still shaking my head, unseen. I don't know. Then he played his card. The card he knew would work on a bored, housebound 16-year-old. I'll let you hit my weed pen. The whole time. As much as you want. And just like that, my principled stand crumbled. My better judgment was vaporized by the promise of a free, easy high and the desire to be seen as a guy who could handle a favor. I was a dumb kid, and the calculus was simple. Mild, unspecified weirdness from an old friend was worth a night of free access to a vape pen. It was a trade I would have sold my soul to undo an hour later. All right, fine. I sighed, the capitulation already feeling like a mistake. Pull up, but just for the night. Thank you. Seriously, we're like 5 minutes away. He hung up. The 5 minutes felt like an hour. I paced my room, the first pricks of unease needling me. Why was Mason so desperate? Why couldn't Neil go home? The stories about his behavior flitted through my mind, but I batted them away. It's Neil. How bad could it be? I was constructing a narrative. Neil had a blowout with his parents, needed to crash. Mason, being a good friend, was helping. I was being a good friend by providing the couch. It was simple. It was fine. I heard a car pull into the driveway. I went to the front door and opened it. Mason's beat-up Civic sat rumbling at the curb. He got out of the driver's side, his face pale and drawn in the porch light. Neil slid out of the passenger seat. He looked normal. Jeans, a hoodie, his usual lanky frame. He saw me and gave a small, closed-mouthed smile that didn't reach his eyes. Hey, he said. His voice was quiet. Hey, I replied, the weirdness already thickening the air. Mason walked Neil up to the door. He handed me the sleek, metallic weed pen without a word. I took it, the object of my corruption feeling suddenly heavy and cheap. Then Mason turned to Neil. He put both hands on Neil's shoulders, not in a bro-hug way, but in the way a parent grips a child before sending them off to school. He looked Neil dead in the eyes, and I saw, with a shock, that Mason's own eyes were glistening, on the verge of tears. Neil, Mason said, his voice trembling with an emotion so stark it froze me in place. It was fear, pure, unadulterated fear. Remember what we talked about. Okay. Do not do that thing. Promise me. Neil looked back at him, his expression blank, almost bored. I got it, Mason. I understand. His tone was casual, dismissive even. Mason searched his face for a second longer, then released his shoulders, his hands dropping limply to his sides. He gave me one last, hopeless look, a look that screamed I'm sorry, then turned and almost ran back to his car. He peeled away from the curb, his tires chirping slightly. And just like that, I was alone on my porch with Neil, the silent house behind me, and a cold knot of dread tightening in my stomach. I had ignored every red flag, bargained away my safety for a cheap high, and now I was holding the door open for a mystery I was utterly unprepared to solve. Come on in, I said, forcing a casual tone. Neil walked past me into the foyer. He didn't look around at the house. He stood very still just inside the door, as if waiting for an instruction. I closed the door, the lock clicking into place with a definitive sound. The first thing Neil said wasn't "nice place" or "thanks for this." He turned his head toward me, his movements slow and deliberate. "Are all the doors locked?" The question was so abrupt, so out of left field, that it took me a second to process. Red flags, the ones I'd been ignoring, now burst into bright, crimson flames in my mind. Yeah," I stammered. "I mean, the front door is. I just locked it." "Check the others," he said. It wasn't a request. It was a soft, insistent command. My heart began a slow, heavy thump. Okay, I thought, he's just paranoid. He had a fight with his dad. He's scared his dad will come here. That makes sense. It was a flimsy narrative, but I clung to it. "Sure, yeah. This way." I led him down the narrow hallway that ran from the front door toward the back of the house. The laundry room was on the left, its door open, leading to the garage entrance. The back door to the patio was at the end. The hallway felt suddenly claustrophobic. I pointed to the laundry room. "That door goes to the garage. It's locked." I walked to the back door, jiggled the handle for show. "This one's locked too. See? All good." Neil didn't respond. He stood in the middle of the hallway, watching me. The silence stretched, becoming a tangible thing, thick and uncomfortable. I was about to break it, to suggest we go to the living room, when he moved. His right arm shot straight up into the air, rigid, like a student desperately asking a question. At the same time, his face transformed. His lips pulled back from his teeth into a wide, grotesque smile. It wasn't a smile of joy or amusement. It was a rictus grin, a baring of teeth that was entirely disconnected from any human emotion. His eyes stayed locked on mine, unblinking. He held the pose for a full 3 seconds, an eternity in that silent hall, then dropped his arm back to his side. The smile vanished, wiped clean, replaced by the same blank expression. My blood ran cold. Every hair on my arms stood up. This was beyond weird. This was wrong. This was a glitch in the human software standing 6 feet away from me. A nervous, choked sound escaped my throat. A pathetic attempt at a laugh. "Dude, what was that?" I managed, my voice thin. He didn't answer. He just stared. "You want some water or something?" I asked, desperate to inject normalcy to find a script to follow. "Yeah," he said, his voice flat again. Grateful for a directive, I led us into the kitchen. The overhead light was blinding after the dim hall. I went to the fridge, pulled out 2 bottles of water. As I turned, bottle in each hand, I saw Neil. He wasn't looking at me. He was standing by the kitchen counter, his back mostly to me, facing the block of wooden knife handles protruding from a ceramic holder next to the stove. Time seemed to slow, to thicken like syrup. I watched, paralyzed, as his hand lifted. It moved slowly, with a dreadful, dreamlike purpose. His fingers hovered over the handles, then closed around the one belonging to the steak knife, the second largest in the block. A surge of pure, animal adrenaline broke my freeze. I didn't think. I acted. I dropped the water bottles. They hit the tile floor with a loud plastic crack, splashing water. I crossed the 3 steps between us in a blur. My hand shot out and clamped over his, stopping his fingers from closing fully around the knife handle. We stood there, locked in a silent struggle over a utensil my mom used to slice Tuesday night meatloaf. "Neil," I said, my voice a low, strained whisper. "What are you doing?" He didn't fight me. He just stopped. He slowly turned his head to look at me. His expression was one of mild curiosity, as if I'd interrupted him while he was pondering what snack to choose. He let go of the knife handle. I immediately yanked the entire block off the counter and shoved it into a high cabinet, slamming the door shut. My heart was no longer beating in my chest. It was a frantic, trapped bird slamming against my ribs. The fear was a physical taste, coppery and sour, in the back of my throat. This was the life or death fear people talk about. It wasn't about being jumped in an alley. It was about the complete and total unpredictability of the person sharing your space. The person you thought you knew. Neil watched me put the knives away. He let out a single, soft chuckle. "Relax, man," he said, the casual tone horribly mismatched with the last 30 seconds. "I was just looking." He was lying. We both knew he was lying. The moment in the hallway, the focused intent with the knife. This wasn't the Neil I knew. This was something else living behind his eyes. I had one objective now, crystal clear. Get him out of my house. I needed a plan, and I needed it to seem like his idea. I took a shaky breath, trying to steady my voice. "It's kinda stuffy in here. You wanna go to the park? Get some air." The neighborhood park was 3 blocks away, well-lit, public. Away from my kitchen, away from any other potential weapons. Neil considered it for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, okay. Thank God." I led him back toward the front of the house, to the laundry room door that opened to the interior garage and through another door to the driveway. "We can cut through the garage," I said, my mind racing. I opened the laundry room door and gestured for him to go first. He stepped through into the dark garage. I followed, but stopped just inside the threshold. "Oh, shoot," I said, slapping my pocket. "I left my phone, and I need shoes. Go ahead. I'll catch up in 2 seconds." He paused, a shadow in the darker gloom of the garage. I saw a flicker of something on his face. Annoyance? Suspicion? "Hurry up," he said, his voice flat. 2 seconds, I promised. The moment he turned and walked toward the garage's side door, I stepped back into the laundry room, grabbed the handle, and pulled the door shut. My hands were trembling so badly I fumbled with the deadbolt, but I finally threw it, locking the solid wooden door between me and the garage. Then I ran to the front door and threw that deadbolt too. He was outside. He was out. I slid down the wall next to the door, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I pulled out my phone. My first call wasn't to 911. It was to my older brother. He answered, sounding bored. "Yo, get over here. Right now. Bring people. Neil is here. Something is really, really wrong with him." The words tumbled out in a frantic stream. He heard the terror in my voice. "What happened?" "He tried to take a knife. He's acting insane. I locked him out. He's in the driveway. Please just come. Now." I gave him the address again, though he knew it. 5 minutes. Don't open the door. He hung up. The next few minutes were an eternity. From the front window, peering through a slit in the blinds, I could see Neil standing at the end of my driveway. He wasn't trying to get back in. He was just standing there, looking up and down the street, a solitary, unsettling figure under the orange glow of the sodium vapor streetlight. My brother's car, followed by 2 others belonging to friends from the basketball team, screeched to a halt in front of my house in under 5 minutes. 4 guys piled out: my brother, Jake, Marco, and Devin. They were big, athletic, and their presence was a tangible wave of relief. I unlocked the front door and stepped out onto the porch. Neil watched them approach, but he didn't run. He didn't look scared. He looked resigned, and maybe a little irritated, like we were interrupting something important. When my heart rate finally descended from a sprint to a jog, I called Mason. He answered on the first ring. "Is he gone?" he asked, his voice small. "Yeah, he's gone. My brother's friend took him home." "Mason, what the F is okay?" The fear curdled into anger, hot and direct. "What is wrong with him? He tried to grab a knife in my kitchen. He was talking about Illuminati basketball coaches and manifestos." On the other end of the line, Mason let out a long, shuddering sigh. It was the sound of someone who had been holding his breath for days. "He took something," Mason said, his voice breaking, "last weekend, at that party at the lake. He didn't know what it was. Some synthetic shit. It broke him. He hasn't slept in like 3 days. He's been writing this crazy stuff online, saying he hears voices telling him he has to kill himself, or someone else, to save people from his dad. He said his dad was part of it. I was driving him around for hours, trying to calm him down, and he just kept reading this stuff off his phone. Panicked. I just wanted him somewhere contained. I thought if he was with a friend, in a house, he'd be safe. I'm so sorry, man. I was so scared. The pieces snapped together with a sickening finality. The drug, the psychotic break, the voices, the violent imperative of the manifesto. Mason wasn't just dumping a weird friend on me. He was fleeing a psychological meltdown he couldn't handle, passing a live grenade to the first person who would open their door. His desperation had a source, and it was more horrifying than I'd imagined. My anger at Mason dissolved, replaced by a profound, weary sadness for Neil. You should have told me, I said, but the accusation had no heat. I know. I'm sorry. I didn't know what to do. We hung up. The official story came out in bits and pieces over the next month. Neil's parents, terrified, had him admitted to a psychiatric hospital. The diagnosis was a drug-induced psychotic episode, which had essentially activated latent schizophrenia. The voices were a symptom. The manifesto was a delusion. The Neil we knew was buried under the pathology of a brain chemistry disaster. He eventually got out, heavily medicated, a quieter, dimmer version of his former self. We drifted apart completely. How do you go back to joking about video games with someone after you've seen the abyss stare back at you from their eyes? I told my mom the story a month later, after my parents returned, tanned and relaxed from their cruise. I gave her the sanitized version, leaving out the weed pen. She was furious. At me, at Mason, at the situation. You never let someone into this house when we're gone without asking. Ever. Do you understand what could have happened? Her fear was a mirror of my own, finally expressed. I understood. I understood perfectly. I had avoided a headline. I had avoided becoming a cautionary tale about teen drug use and mental health neglect. By sheer, dumb luck and a last-second spike of vigilance, I had locked the door between myself and a tragedy. But the near-miss left a permanent mark. It taught me that monsters aren't always strangers in the dark. Sometimes, they're your friends, hijacked by their own minds, and the most terrifying thing of all is that they don't even know they're the monster. They think they're the hero of the story, and that belief is what makes them so dangerous. The aftermath of that night wasn't dramatic. There were no police reports, no family confrontations like in the previous stories. It was a quiet, internal seismic shift. For weeks, I was hyper-aware of sounds in my own house. The click of the heater turning on would make me jump. I'd find myself double-checking that the back door was locked long after I'd already checked it. The kitchen, especially, felt different. The counter where the knife block had sat seemed accusatory in its emptiness. I'd rehearsed the moment in my head, the slow-motion reach of Neil's hand, the cold terror of my own intervention. What if I'd been half a second slower? What if I'd been in the other room? The contingency plans my brain generated were all horror movies. I thought about Mason a lot. My anger at him was fleeting, replaced by a complicated pity. He was a kid, too, faced with a situation light years beyond his ability to manage. His solution, to offload the problem onto someone else, was cowardly, but it was also human. He saw a fire he couldn't put out and ran, hoping someone else had a hose. I was that someone else, and I'd almost gotten burned. It taught me a harsh lesson about the weight of other people's secrets and the cost of being the easy solution. But mostly I thought about Neil. The ghost of the kid I knew haunted the caricature he'd become. The goofy, fearless third grader who ate a worm on a dare was now a muted, medicated teenager who couldn't look you in the eye for too long. The tragedy wasn't just the psychotic break. It was the theft of a person. The drugs hadn't just given him a bad trip. They had performed a hostile takeover of his identity, and the original tenant might never fully return. Our friendship, a decade of shared history, was a casualty of that takeover. You can't be friends with a memory. You can't joke about the past with someone for whom the past is a country they can no longer visit. The experience left me with a permanent, low-grade distrust of altered states. The promise of a cheap high had literally almost cost me my life. The trade was so laughably, horrifically unbalanced it felt like a cosmic joke. I became the sober one at parties, the designated driver, the guy who watched from the sidelines with a new, grim understanding of the roulette while people were spinning. I saw the laughter and the blurred eyes, and I wondered which one of them was a secret away from their own manifesto, their own moment in a friend's kitchen, reaching for a sharp solution to a problem only they could hear. Years later, the fear has mellowed into a sober wisdom. I don't have nightmares about Neil, but I carry the knowledge that sanity is a thin veneer, that the mind is a fragile ecosystem, and that sometimes the person you need to be most afraid of is the one you call a friend, smiling at you from the passenger seat, on a quiet spring break night, with a universe of chaos screaming silently behind their eyes. I paid attention in that kitchen. It was the most important thing I've ever done. We have entire playlists dedicated to these chilling, real-life accounts. Stories of stalkers, of home invasions narrowly avoided, of everyday encounters that turned into nightmares. If you want to explore more places where true terror hides in plain sight, check out our playlist When Safe Places Lie. The next video is already waiting for you. Thank you for watching. If these true childhood nightmares resonated with you, share your own experiences in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that will make you question the shadows in your own home. Stay safe out there.